Welcome to this video about writing a thesis statement brought to you by the Writing Center. Some of these examples of materials are drawn from Dr. Stephanie Bell's workshop materials on formulating your argument and crafting your thesis. In many academic courses, you're asked to write an argumentative essay that calls for a thesis statement. But what is a thesis statement, and how do you come up with one? First, look carefully at the assignment description. In first and second year courses, your professor often provides a question, a topic, or a choice of questions and topics for you to answer. Sometimes you're given a general question or topic, and you have to make it more specific. In third and fourth year courses, you're often asked to find your own topic and research question on an issue or topic that's clearly related to the course content. In either case, you begin with a question that you attempt to answer through doing analysis and collecting data. Some of those sample questions might be: how are Indigenous women portrayed in mainstream Canadian news media before and after the Truth and Reconciliation report? Why are boots important in Waiting for Godot? What is the relationship between lack of sleep and willpower among gamers? Critically compare how motherhood is represented in Author A and Author B. And what are the central causes of the Gulf War? You may be given such questions, or you may take a look at the assignment and you may have to write such a question yourself. But before you come up with the thesis statement, you do have to figure out what question you're actually going to answer. So what is a thesis statement? Basically, it's your answer to the question that you asked or that you were asked to answer. It's also your statement of a position that you will argue throughout the paper. And it's placed in the beginning of your paper so that we can find it. If you look at the diagram of an essay on the right, you'll see that the top inverted triangle is the beginning of your essay, and your thesis statement will go towards the end of that beginning. The middle of your essay is where you make your main points, you bring in your evidence, and you tell us the meaning of that evidence. And then the ending states your conclusions and their significance. Here's an example of a thesis statement. Say you're answering the question, why are boots important in Waiting for Godot? And you have gone through that piece of literature looking for the role of boots. You've done the analysis, and then you have to come up with a thesis. So if your question is, why are boots important in Waiting for Godot? Your thesis answers the question. In Waiting for Godot, boots represent the discomfort of a life that's constantly chafing. Generally speaking, you go beyond that to the significance or meaning and tell us that the message is that suffering is the meaning of life. Now, if you look at that thesis statement, in Waiting for Godot, boots represent the discomfort of a life that's constantly chafing, you can see how it answers the question. You can also see how it represents a position or perspective that you state in the beginning of the paper and that you're going to argue through the rest of the paper. In other words, in the middle of your essay, you are going to present evidence that supports your position about boots in Waiting for Godot. Here's a second example, this time based on what we call a comparison-contrast essay, where you look for similarities between two authors and you also look for differences between their perspectives. If the underlying question is critically compare how motherhood is represented in Author A and Author B, then a thesis statement might be, Keats' depiction of motherhood in poem contrasts starkly with James in novel. While Keats depicts motherhood as nostalgic Earth Mother type, James' third wave depiction involves cyborgs. What you can see in this thesis statement is, first, it's more than one sentence long. In the first sentence, you're stating a position that Keats' depiction contrasts a great deal with James. But you then have to go on and say how they differ. In the second part of the thesis statement, Keats depicts motherhood as nostalgic Mother Earth, whereas James depicts motherhood as a third wave depiction involving cyborgs. So you can see that this person, these are all made up, by the way, so you won't find them anywhere. You can see that the person writing this has done the analytic work needed to be able to make this statement. This answers the question about critically comparing motherhood. Now, if you want to go beyond that, this is what Dr. Bell calls the mic drop. You can also make a statement of the significance about your findings. And that's both Keats's nostalgic motherhood and James' New Age depiction of motherhood place the vision of motherhood firmly into a regressive box. Where do you put the thesis statements? In the beginning of your paper. Your introduction should begin with the situation, the issue you're studying, or the context, so that your readers understand what you're going to be discussing in the paper. Once you've introduced that situation, issue, or context, you then include the thesis statement. That is, your answer to the question you're being asked and your argumentative stance. You also state the significance of your answer also in the beginning. Why do you include the thesis statement, that is your answer to your question in the introduction, if you have to go all the way through doing the analysis, providing evidence, and so on and so forth in the middle of your essay, and then you end up coming to some kind of answer in the concluding part of your essay? Well, that's because in North America, we don't like to wait. In North American essays, you have to tell your reader what you're going to argue immediately. And that means putting your answer, your thesis statement, right in the introduction to your paper. After that, you are going to show us the evidence and how you arrived at that answer in the middle of your essay. That's where you include your main points, your evidence, and the meaning of that evidence. And you then, of course, tell us the answer again, but in different words, in your conclusion. You also tell us why that conclusion is important in relation to the issue, the piece of literature, or the situation. In some fields in your ending, you may also be called upon to give recommendations for a solution to the issue if one is called for. How do you arrive at your answer to the question, that is, at a thesis statement? First thing you do is you write the middle of the paper and you use evidence that you've collected to support your analysis. You'll probably then arrive at the answer to the question at the end of your analysis and paper. So in the diagram at the right, it shows the middle of your paper, and then it shows where you will probably find the answer. Now, this only makes sense because you can't really arrive at an in-depth, solid answer until you've done all that analysis, that evidence gathering, that going through to figure out what your in-depth answer is going to be. So once you have done that work of presenting your main points, the evidence to support them, the analysis, and the meaning of that evidence in the middle, you do arrive at an answer somewhere in the ending of your essay. What you then do is lift that answer from the end and turn it into a thesis statement. You then place that thesis statement in your introduction. You leave it in your conclusion as well, and you make sure you change the wording slightly so that you're not just repeating yourself. We're often asked about the difference between thesis statements, statements of purpose, and so on and so forth. There's a straightforward answer to that, and I'll use this example to explain it. If your question is, what were the causes of the Gulf War? Then your statement of purpose simply records or documents what you intend to do. So for instance, in this essay, I will investigate the central causes of the Gulf War. There is no argument given here, and there is no position. There's no answer to the question. This is simply a declaration of what you're going to do. Words like investigate and explore indicate what you intend to do, but obviously don't give us an answer to that question or the position you're going to take in the paper. In contrast to a thesis statement and statements of purpose, a roadmap gives readers directions about what they'll find in your paper and the order that they'll find them in. It is like a little roadmap about what we can expect to find. So the example here, again in relation to that question about the Gulf War, in this paper, I explained the event that instigated the declaration of the Gulf War. I revealed that this spark was so catching by illuminating the animosity between the US and Iraq throughout the Cold War and over the Israel-Palestine question. And finally, I point to political speeches and military strategies that are particularly revealing of the significance of this tense relationship for the cause of war. But that's not a thesis statement either. It is literally a roadmap to the content of your paper so that we know what to expect and the order to expect it in. It tells readers what you'll do, but it doesn't state your answer. Here is the thesis statement, and you should be able to tell the difference. If the question is, what were the causes of the Gulf War? The thesis answers that question by saying, while Iraq's invasion of Kuwait was pointed to as a central cause of the Gulf War by political leaders at the time, it is evident that America's animosity towards Iraq throughout the Cold War ultimately tipped the scale toward conflict. This answers the question directly, and it also states a position that this student will argue throughout the paper. Let's look at the three different types of statements all together to clearly see the difference between them. The purpose, as I said, uses words like investigate and explore, and it gives the goal for the paper, but it doesn't answer the question. The thesis statement, in contrast, does state a position that the student will argue throughout the paper. Contained in the clause, it is evident that America's animosity towards Iraq throughout the Cold War ultimately tipped the scale towards conflict. In contrast to that, the roadmap gives us the sequence of content we will find in the middle of the paper in the order that it is placed. You may be asked to include all three of these types of statements in your paper, or you may only be called on for the thesis statement. Dr. Bell also suggests ways of getting started if you're having difficulty. If you're asked to draft a thesis statement before you write your paper and you're having difficulty with that, then try doing some of the analysis and then go back and craft a specific question that you're seeking to answer in the paper. Transform that question into a finish the sentence statement. So you may start with, what is the significance of boots in such and such a book? And you can then turn that around into, the significance of boots in such and such a book is, and you fill in the blank. If you are still having difficulties, try these activities. Think, work, focus, reflect. You can also try talking to a friend. You can use the Writing Center. We have experts available who can help you at any stage of your process. Procrastinate for a bit to let your mind rest and then go back to work. Save your drafts. They usually contain something you can use in the final paper. Take notes about the evidence, about quotations, about data. Try shifting the way that you write. If you use a computer, for example, switch to paper. If you usually use paper, switch to the computer. Draw pictures, draw maps about the question you're working on and the piece or the data that you're working on. You can also try timed writing, where you simply sit down and write for 10 minutes at a time to see what you come up with. Remember that the Writing Center is here to help. We offer free 50-minute video chats that you can book on your own once you've registered. We also offer 15-minute drop-ins for quick questions. We have a series of workshops we run every term on specific aspects of writing. We offer learning opportunities that will stand you in good stead for life with knowledgeable writers. Simply go to our homepage, click Enroll to register, and book your own appointments, or search for us. We are the Writing Center on York's site. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found this video helpful.